I think Julian Assange is the epitome of what's happening right now. I mean, he's an Australian citizen that's never released any false information ever, and we're acting like he violated our Espionage Act as an Australian citizen as we torture this man in prison, kept him in solitary confinement for the last 7 years. I mean, and you guys have done a great job covering Assange on your show, but just the theater and the blatant cruelty that they're visiting on him is so chilling because that's all directed at all of us. I mean, I think what they're most scared of are journalists. They're most scared of people that are exposing them for their crimes and what they've been doing. And this is a big debate I've been having with myself a lot of how do we move forward? Because there's a part of me that does not believe that we can move forward until we completely topple this system as a whole. And there's another half of me that realizes that if we're going to change the system and we're going to get things like ranked choice voting and all of these other things, that we have to find a way to take power in this corrupt system itself to change it. Because the Democratic Party, no matter who we elect, they're never going to give us any of these things to take away their power itself. And by the time we might try to make that happen in 5 or 10 years, we're going to have lost 100 other rights and privileges, and we're going to have backslid to such an extent that there is no real escape. So do you think that we can take power in this corrupt duopoly through a third party, that this is actually possible and worthwhile for our energy? Or do you think it requires a collapse in order for us to move forward?
Yeah, I used to think we could take it in a peaceful way. But right now I'm seeing what the establishment, what this oligarchy, what these elites, what these fascists are doing to people left and right, whether they're protesters, whether they're journalists, whether they're people dissenting. And I'm not seeing the necessary power holds or necessary organization to happen right now to overtake that through a third party. So I think in order for something new to be built, oftentimes things need to fall apart. And so I think the only way forward is, at the very least, the destruction of the Democratic Party. At the very least, the Democratic Party has got to be completely in shambles for progressives to form something else, or the whole system as a whole has to fall apart so everybody can be uncomfortable. Because the problem with Americans largely is that I just mentioned, that they want to continue going to brunch, they want to continue being comfortable, and a lot of people don't like it when you disrupt that level of comfort. And they don't feel anything when it's not immediate. When you're not immediately being attacked by the police, you've never experienced that, so you think they're fine, they're just doing their job. Your point of view will shift entirely when you get tear gas, when you have these experiences. And other people who have felt that way before have spoken out and said, I changed me, these protests had changed me. I've largely had great interactions with the police state before, but after this, no, it radicalizes you in a sense. The destruction and the falling apart of everything. This is why I think Trump has been the exploiter of a system, the catalyst of the system, whereas Biden and the Democratic Party and those Republicans like Bush and Cheney have been the architects of the system that led to Trump exploiting it. And so when people tell me is it possible to really get power without by asking for it? No, it's not. You're going to have to demand this, and it's going to take the system falling apart as it is now, and it might get worse. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I think if we have these ideas and these foundations in place, once it falls apart, we'll be better equipped to really take hold and handle it. But it's got to be a people's movement. It's got to be entirely all people coming together. And America is still a very young country, and we haven't done what France has done ever. We haven't redone our constitution. Other countries are on their 12th constitution. We can barely touch ours. So I think because there's so much resistance on that, because we're a very conservative country as a whole, we're going to have to fight that as well. We're going to have to, I think there's going to be, if not a civil war, there's going to be some sort of altercation that's going to happen. I think with this election, more so because it's the tipping point rather than because of the election itself.
The naive part of me
Mhm.
really wants to believe that we can start a third party and that we can crush the Democratic Party out of existence and that we can try to build a base of power from there. But the more realist part of me realizes that if all these voting machines have been captured for 20 years, they don't have to use the tools and don't even want to use the tools every year to expose themselves for the real power that they hold. But the rational part of me says that there is absolutely no way that they will let a third party come to power in America, regardless of what it takes in order to stop that.
Mhm.
And on the flip side of that, collapse is another scary thing for me because I know the pain that is going to come along with a
Yeah.
collapse and because people don't really realize what we've done with the world, with our empire, with the petrodollar, how we've the reason why we're so stuck on fossil fuels and the reason why like rational people you think that are trying to help us keep us on this fossil fuel path and they keep us on this war path because our entire currency, our entire system is based on the fact that every country around the world has to buy oil and everyone has to use dollars to do it. So it keeps our economy propped up no matter what happens, as long as we keep waging war and we keep everybody on oil. And if we start to erode the system, which we have to because we're monsters out there in the world, but if we erode this system, the collapse and the pain that will reverberate not just here and around the world is going to be horrific because we've built this giant bubble that's got to pop at some point.
Yeah.
And the longer that this goes on, the bigger the bubble is going to get and the more painful it's going to be. And that's the thing I've really struggled with of what the right tactic is to move forward on this because it's kind of bleak for us in all ways.
Yeah.
And for me, it comes down to empire. Do you think that we have brought the empire home to America now, or do you think we still have further to go before we really see the tactics of abroad coming home?
I think we've begun, absolutely begun driving driving the empire here. I mean, I've experienced it myself that the way the feds literally bashed the car window that we were in and
I saw that.
completely it was, and it just felt like a war zone being in Portland, Oregon. And I did not see the necessity for that from the protesters, even the most radical protesters. What were they doing? Throwing water bottles? To be met with war weapons. I mean, if America does what we do to people in Syria, if we sanction the hell out of people in these countries and then they die by the millions, if we bomb and drone and go and remove democratically elected leaders left and right from Bolivia, from Latin America, from Nicaragua, from all these other countries in the Middle East and Latin America, etc. What do you think? Uh, are you surprised that they're going to do this to our own people? Are we surprised that the American military-industrial complex and the intelligence communities who are jailing Assange for literally to speaking truth and
Mm-hmm.
doing his job as a journalist, are if they're doing that to these people, what do you think they can do to us? And I think that is a fear that a lot of people have. That's one of the fears of why people don't revolt in America, because we're like, well, they're going to drone us. They're going to do this to us. Look what they did to Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy. Anybody that attacks the military industrial complex is automatically either completely smeared as some foreign asset or as a complete loon, or is murdered. And that's something like people used to say, oh, that's conspiracy. It is no longer conspiracy. You're seeing it happen. You're seeing these journalists, these people be vilified, these whistleblowers be vilified simply because they're exposing the truth. And I think America has definitely brought their imperialism home, and I think it's going to get worse. And just to your point about the things falling apart, it is absolutely scary. But I think there's got to be also an end to the American empire. Joe Biden just said he's really willing and ready to support Juan Guaido in Venezuela against Maduro. And if that doesn't give you another reason to not vote for Joe Biden, I don't know what does, because Venezuela right now is one of the only strongholds of socialism in Latin America. We've pretty much dismantled everything else. in America. I mean, we got rid of Evo Morales by bringing in literal Nazis, and it's really scary to see, to think about that in those terms. And I think a lot of our left, a lot of the, even the real left, sometimes we don't pay attention to foreign policy because it's so far removed from our shores, that and so from our psyche, where we're so focused on getting Medicare for all and getting, you know, a Green New Deal and all these things. But we removing, like, not talking about that foreign policy is directly affecting our domestic policy. There is no separation. We have complete money for the military and for funding Israel with arms and Saudi Arabia with arms, but we never have enough money for our people. So we have more in common with the working class people of those of under our empire than we do with our own presidents. So we have to realize that, and really start talking about our foreign policy and what's happening. Because if nuclear war happens tomorrow, it doesn't matter what you believe in. We're all screwed. I mean, and we're closer and closer and closer and inching to that clock at midnight where we're talking about nuclear warfare, which is completely going to destroy any notion of climate, any notion of the future. It's apocalyptic in itself. And we have to really watch out with relations with Russia, China, and Iran right now, because all of those relationships are very, very much on a very thin line.
Yeah, I mean, in my view, the point of the American empire, the point of our military, really since World War II, has been to go to war with the left, no matter where the left exists in the world, to protect the ownership class that owns everything around the world. The reason you don't see a successful socialist state or like real successful communist state around the world is because we have used the entire might of our military, our economy, to crush every last single one of them, to create the most amount of suffering that we can possibly create in these countries. The reason that Venezuela has had any problems is because we arbitrarily sanction them and are trying to starve them and their people out, and to stop anyone from doing any kind of trade or dealings or business with them as we try a coup every year. And we've kind of spread this whole policy, this whole idea all over the world, and we forced everyone to kind of buy into this policy. And we're almost basically a mafia state around the world, where we're like, you better buy our oil, and you can only use dollars to do it. And if you don't do it, we're going to come in and we're going to kill you, and we're going to take over your country, just like we did in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Niger, Yemen. I mean, and the atrocities that we are committing around the world. It's not just George Bush years where it's torture in Abu Ghraib. I mean, in Somalia, we armed an army of Ethiopians to start a civil war. They butchered all the black people in the country with an ethnic cleansing. We've got Libya, where there's open air slave markets, and where we literally armed and trained al-Qaeda terrorists to overthrow the country and turned it into this violent, chaotic state when it was one of the most successful states in Africa. And going back to Assange and WikiLeaks and how important they are, is Assange and WikiLeaks are the ones that exposed the reason that we even went into Libya. It's because the United States and France were really uncomfortable with the fact that Libya had a lot of gold, and they were talking to Iran and Venezuela and some other countries about trying to start a pan-African currency in order to just get out from under the heel and the boot of the American empire. And you can read in the WikiLeaks emails about how we put together this giant plan to destabilize the country, overthrow the government, and take pretty much everything that's there for ours. And that was the United States, France, Hillary Clinton. And this is the policy that we're just exacerbating across the globe as we kind of perpetuate this mafia state. And so I don't think that our struggle in these cities is just us. I feel like we're kind of fighting for the fate of the world as a whole, because we've, like, the things that we've done around the world, we have to find some sense of atonement for. And people are scared. They're scared to accept that onto themselves. Because I'd make a point of trying to make people understand that we are murderers together. If you've paid taxes, if you've been a part of this system, we are together collectively responsible for the deaths of millions of people, the destruction of countries, that we're bigger slavers than any other generation in human history, because there's more slaves now than there's ever been in the thousands of years that we've kept human history going. And so getting people to understand that has been kind of the biggest struggle
Yeah.
me moving forward, and getting people to just start to look at some of these things. Like you talked about how, and you guys got your windows busted out when you went into one of the protests. I watched that happen, and it was like watching a movie. Like you guys rolled into this really fog-ridden state, and there's all these black suited paramilitary mercenaries that just roll up on you out of the fog, and they don't ask questions. They just start bashing out your windows. And I feel like that's the design, is they're trying to scare us. They're desperate to put the genie back in the bottle in a way. Do you think that they can, or do you think that this is exploded out, and there's no putting this back?
I think they're going to have a very hard time, even if Biden wins. Like I said, I mean, I think that's what they want. They want to put people back to sleep. They want to give some crumbs so you're content for a little bit, so they can continue behind the scenes with their foreign policy, because still not enough people pay attention to foreign policy. And that's really what moves things through. That's really what really is shifting the world, is our foreign policy. That's our imperialism. And I think they're going to have a hard time, because this younger generation that I'm seeing is really quick to catch on to a lot of these things. However, I don't put it past the CIA and their tactics to infiltrate these movements, as they have been trying to do. Like we've seen the NGOs in Hong Kong. We've seen the NGOs like do a lot of things in Belarus and other countries, where, like, even in Venezuela, trying to paint the Juan Guaido protesters and the Juan Guaido regime as like the real, they're uprising, you guys. They're protesting the corrupt, dictator. So I think the CIA kind of mirrors a lot of the real protests here, and tries to use them in other countries to sort of sway American public interest into saying, well, we have to protect our interests from Iran. I'd rather have an American dictatorship instead of another dictatorship, I heard somebody say on Twitter, and I was flabbergasted. I mean, I think it's possible, but I think it's getting increasingly difficult for them to do, because there are more shows like this, and people realizing, like, okay, we're the bullies here. We're the ones that go and take and don't ask questions, and we vilify everybody we disagree with as a dictator. This is, the Syrian chemical attacks were completely debunked. Russiagate was completely
But
debunked.
nobody knows this, though, which is what's crazy.
I think more and more people are starting to figure it out, but I agree that it's still largely completely missed, and it's mainly missed because of the propaganda machine. So my fear is that if Julian Assange is extradited, that might mean the end of journalism at all. And it's not like we had a real fourth estate in the United States anyway. What we have is a bunch of public relations propagandists on CNN and MSNBC, and then the real journalists are the independent media, behind the scenes, trying to tell the stories, and the whistleblowers. And so if we start going after those whistleblowers like we already have, and the journalists like Julian Assange, then that's what's going to keep the public asleep. I think that's what they're trying to do, is to completely cement that. And this is why right now we have the opportunity, where I think the time is ripe to continue pushing that the voices of Julian Assange, and our voices, because we're not going to have a second shot at it. I think if they are able to put us down and completely silence and censor, which is what they're trying to do on Twitter, Facebook, you name it, YouTube, every other platform, then we're screwed, because the people aren't going to get this information at all. They already don't know enough. But if they completely silence all dissenting voices, then that's what's going to allow the second big sleep to happen. The first one being with, of course, Barack Obama.
Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to click like and subscribe. Also, be sure to ring that bell if you'd like notifications when we release new videos, and I promise they are coming. Also, you can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at wearethenewleft. And if Corona hasn't stolen your job and you'd like to see more videos like this, then please consider supporting the show on Patreon or donating.